Hello everybody, this is Victoria, and today we're going to talk about poaching and how it destroys Africa's ecosystem one species at a time. So my first topic here is, what is biodiversity? Well, biodiversity refers to the variety of life on Earth at all its levels, from genes to ecosystems, and can encompass the evolutionary, ecological, and cultural processes that sustain life. So biodiversity is very important, and we'll talk about that in some upcoming slides. But the first thing I'd like to talk about is how biodiversity can show up in species. Now, there are certain animals that are very important to ecosystems. These are some examples. Keystone species. Pretty much if you were to remove these animals from the environment, it could cause a huge change or even shift in the trophic levels and things like that. And it can be anywhere from a prey to a host, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an apex predator. It can be somewhere on the trophic level. The next type of species is umbrella species. These animals are very similar to keystone species, but typically they have a specific geographic area or range, and they have a lot of need to make up for their habitat, so they need a lot of things, and if those things weren't there, they wouldn't be able to survive. The next is foundation species. Foundation species are the animals that create or maintain habitats. Therefore, if they were to be removed, there wouldn't be habitat for other animals. There is also ecosystem engineers. They also help modify, create, and maintain habitats. A good example of this is the elephant, which we will be specifically talking about today. There is indicator species, which are very sensitive to change. It could show if an area is suffering from pollution or things like that. There's also flagship species, which are typically like a symbol for an area. So, for example, Save the Turtles would be considered a flagship species. There is also nutrient vectors, and those are animals that help transfer nutrients, and they typically are also a keystone species. So now that we talked about what biodiversity is, now we're going to talk about biodiversity laws. So biodiversity loss can happen for many reasons. The number one reason, though, is habitat loss. Obviously, if an animal doesn't have its habitat, it's not going to be able to survive in it. Some examples of habitat loss is habitat fragmentation. That typically happens when an area is broken up, so the animal has a smaller place to live. Putting in roads would be an example of that. There's also slash and burn agriculture, which is very bad for habitats because they pretty much cut it down and burn it, and it's not able to regrow. There's urbanization, so building houses and things like that. And there's also land grabbing. Another cause for biodiversity loss is pollution. Pollution is very bad. It can kill animals very easily, and it can come up in the water, it could be in the air, soil, it can be in the form of light or noise, and also thermal, which is just heat. Pretty much with biomagnification, for example with plastic, the plastic just gets more built up in an animal system, so it's very bad. Some other reasons for biodiversity loss include overharvesting and overfishing. Some people use animals for medication. Another reason for biodiversity loss is invasive species. If an animal is introduced to an area that it is not normally in, it can take up food and habitats that other animals need. Therefore, the native animals cannot survive anymore, and those invasive species kind of take hold of that area. And lastly, parasites and diseases are also a big issue that can break down and lose biodiversity. Some areas that are really affected by biodiversity loss include tropical forests, particularly the Amazon. The Amazon is a great example. It is mostly suffering from habitat loss, and it's really important that we save our Amazon forest because it makes up more than 50% of all species and plants in the world, yet only takes up about 2% of the land. So it's super important to save that. Some other areas that are struggling with biodiversity loss include wetlands, mangrove swamps, drylands because of desertification, and the coral reefs. So how does biodiversity affect us? So the first way that biodiversity affects us is in material contributions. So obviously if we're losing animals, we're going to lose a lot of the materials that we use. The first type of materials is energy resources, such as firewood and fuels, food resources, which can include fruit and bushmeat. Materials, companionship, and labor can include clothes, decor, and jobs and things like that. And lastly, medicinal, biochemical, and genetic resources include like plants and fungi and crops and things like that that we can use. Some non-material contributions would include inspiration and learning support. So, for example, a lot of music is inspired by plants and animals. Psychologically, the environment is very good for us and our brain. And lastly, supporting individual and group identities. So a lot of people's religions and cultural values have to do with the environment. And lastly, our ecosystem does play a very big role in our economic system. It makes a lot of money for us, so it's very important that we prevent biodiversity loss. And some non-material things that are also very important is that our environment provides a lot of services for us. It helps control the climate. It helps control the water. For example, swamps are big filtration, so it gets rid of pollution. The soil can help prevent runoff, and it also soaks up a lot of water from the rain. Also, our plants are a big proportion of pollinating and seed dispersion. A lot of our animals carry seeds from very far away, so we wouldn't have plants and flowers and things like that if it weren't for certain animals. Some of our animals also help us detect hazards, specifically animals that are very sensitive to pollution. So if we see that an animal is decreasing, we can tell if an area is of concern. And lastly, a lot of animals help keep pests down. A lot of birds do that. Scavengers will eat dead animals, preventing disease outbreaks. So long story short, if we let biodiversity loss continue, we can have some really bad effects. So the main topic today about biodiversity loss is actually going to be focusing on elephants. Elephants are extremely in danger of poaching because it can make a lot of money. People would pay for these animals' tusks, specifically for cultural reasons and also because they think it is a good decor. The other reason that elephants are being poached is because of a poor economy. Sometimes people will kill them for bushmeat. Unfortunately, there's only 500,000 elephants left in the world, and about 30,000 are being killed each year. The population has actually decreased 62% within just a decade. So if we continue on this rate, eventually elephants could go extinct. So why are elephants so important? Why should we not let poaching happen and let them go extinct? Well, they are considered ecosystem engineers. They make a lot of habitats for animals. They knock down trees for small animals live in. They also can create watering holes, and they push down the grass and trees for a lot of grazing animals. They also are a source of food, specifically for beetles and insects that will eat their dung. And lastly, they are also seed dispersal animals. That being said, they can disperse seeds farthest than any other animal there is, really. It's 30 times faster than birds, and it's about 65 kilometers, which is a very long amount of area. This right here is my ecological framework. This kind of just goes in description what I just told you. Up here at the top, we talk about why poaching happens, how it affects the environment, and then down at the bottom we'll talk about ways to solve it and how it kind of goes back to poaching of elephants. So in the past, we have tried a couple of things. We have tried dyeing tusks, poisoning tusks, and dehorning tusks. Current attempts to sell the elephant. Fighting poverty is a big one. We try to traffic people who are hunting elephants through traffic and using a system called sites. Another thing is we're upping in security in areas where elephants live. They are training people and equipping them with proper equipment, hopefully to deter poachers. The other thing is there's a lot of education going on out there trying to bring awareness. And there's a lot of organizations out there such as WWF that particularly really focus on helping elephants. I personally think the most beneficial way to help the elephants would be to fight poverty. I think we need to address the source of the problem because people are going to keep poaching if they don't have money. I also think that this needs to be brought aware to a lot of people. I don't think they realize how bad the situation is. I don't really think that the poisoning tusks and things like that work. I think those are only temporary solutions. How can you help save the elephants? Well, you could donate to pretty much any site. There's an example of one right there, savetheelephants.org. You can also help educate other people about the importance of elephants and how they can help them. Another way is make sure you're boycotting ivory. Don't use ivory products. It just encourages the trade of them. And I particularly think targeting young audiences is very valuable. I think their minds are kind of moldable, and that they can go on and teach others, and that they can talk to their parents about it, and hopefully that will get the everybody talking about the issue at hand. And my slogan here is, let's talk about the elephants in the room, and it kind of just addresses that idea that, hey, we need to talk about poaching and we need to find a solution. So, where can we go now? Well, definitely, we need to fight that poverty. We need to make a difference in elephants' lives now, because if we continue going in the direction we are, within a decade, elephants can go extinct. And then that is just going to set off a cascade effect of how other animals are going to be affected, and other animals are going to go extinct. And by then, it's just a repeating cycle, which would not be good. So we definitely have to take action now, unless we're going to be unable to save all the elephants. Lastly, I just want to thank everybody for listening. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me at my email stated right there, vcarroll3640@gmail.com. And right here, some of my resources, if you would like to take a look at them. There's a lot of great information on there about biodiversity and elephants and things like that. Thank you and have a great night.